What a perfect intro. All right, guys, and so we're live. Let me check you. Luke, you seem to be muted.
Yeah. Didn't think you put me on the spot like that. I thought I'd get some warning.
I thought that was the perfect moment to bring you in.
Oh, with the circles going, yeah. Yeah, so how's things, man? Oh, that's right, we're live now. Happy days. Kick off.
Yeah, absolutely. So welcome, everyone. We do this weekly. My name's Peter. That's Luke. Hi, Jason. Yeah, we try to do a Joe Rogan style kind of podcast every week, every Saturday around 6 p.m. Manila time. We give you the debrief on what's happening in the blockchain crypto world as a whole, kind of like what the headline news is, but then also we give you a little bit of kind of what's happening in our side of the world in Southeast Asia. So you can kind of keep a temperature check of what's happening here. Luke, anything you want to add to that?
No, but I suppose the only main difference is that it's the same people every week compared to Joe Rogan.
That's true. That's true. Right. I remember it was at the Elon Musk edition was with the smoking in the office.
Yeah, except what I'm doing isn't illegal, so it's all good.
All right.
Actually, technically, I guess if they're in California, technically what he was doing wasn't illegal either. Because yeah. So okay, let's kick off.
Yeah, sounds good. Right, so you should be able to see my slides already. So can you see that on your screen?
Yeah. What's the YouTube that this is being streamed on?
So this is on YouTube on BlockchainSpace, and then it's also on the Facebook of BlockchainSpace.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah. All right. If you give me a second, I'm just going to put up my slides here. So I think from my side and from this week, even though the title of our webcast today is actually about DeFi, what I'm going to talk about in Southeast Asia is more about optics and PR. So I think that's something that our space thrives with and needs a lot of support in. And it's something that grabs headlines kind of every week and gives those that are not really in the space and just kind of following it, kind of like the general perception of kind of what's happening. And so one of the big talks at the town for the last week, especially in the Philippines, is actually something called Wirecard. So Wirecard is actually a Germany-based fintech payment processor. And they've actually been around for more than a decade now. But what happened in the last week is basically a scandal emerged. And it was very unfortunate, again, that the Philippines kind of got highlighted in this scandal. And I'll just kind of like give a very high level overview of what happened. Yeah, so you guys can get an understanding of it. So Wirecard themselves actually were under investigation for some time. I think only KPMG and Ernst & Young were brought in basically to investigate Wirecard's accounts in March 2020. But basically there was something that wasn't adding up in terms of third-party revenues to the amount of $2.1 billion US. Right? And it's supposedly these funds were coming from third-party revenues, and there were some documentation that were submitted, I believe, on the Ernst & Young side that actually showed that these funds were actually sitting in Philippine bank accounts. So what came to light basically in the last week is that these $2.1 billion pretty much were never existed, and they were actually just paper-based or digital kind of representations of the cash, but then this cash actually never entered the Philippines at all. Now I caveat that all of this is alleged because the investigations are still ongoing right now. But yeah, supposedly there were basically two banks, two very dominant banks over here in the Philippines that were linked by name, right? And what happened is that once the report from the consultancies came out, the central bank over here was very quick to initiate an investigation together with the banks, to work together with them to find out exactly what's going on, because obviously it's a huge sum of money, and they didn't understand what was happening here. And what's been happening is in more recent documentation is shown that maybe some internal employees may have faked some deposit documents, right, showing that actually funds were existing in one or two of these banks, right? And obviously, these employees were highlighted and dealt with. The other part, and what affects the Philippines, is really that now the COO of Wirecard allegedly is residing here in the Philippines, and according to his immigration status, showed that he came into the country in the last couple of months, and they can't see him actually leaving, so he's here somewhere. And so obviously the optics look terrible for the Philippines, it also shows that it raises the question, like how these junior staff ever got to create such kind of paperwork that would be able to support such ludicrous kind of like deposit amounts without actually kind of like any kind of background checks or more checks in place. But yeah, so this is something that's ongoing. I think it's not great for the local perception, but I mean it's definitely being dealt with. But it won't help in terms of why the fintech space is kind of like full of these kind of like these potential problems. Any thoughts on this, Luke?
Sorry, I was just getting a jacket on. Look, I think stuff like this is still going to be fairly common leading up here over the next little while. I mean, I'm not trying to be completely prejudiced, but especially in places like the Philippines, where I guess companies like this, not only would there be a lot of local companies that come into Southeast Asia with the view of, not maybe doing the best by the local population, but there's also a lot of international companies that will target Southeast Asia as a place where they can try to basically bring people into their dodgy operations or scams or whatever, because they know that a lot of people will be suckered in. So I'd probably say that with the current, the current wave of DeFi sort of boom, which is sort of what we're talking about today, I don't think there's going to be a lot of scammy type stuff initially, but once the popularity kicks on, people need to be really careful probably over the next few months as sort of the kind of dodgy people that are like, oh, let's get on the back of this hype and we can raise some dodgy project. I think that's what people should be on the lookout for. I think there's going to be a lot more of that over the next little while.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. All right. Let me move on. So again, I talk about PR and optics, and there's some negative, and there always has to be some positive out there. And I think that this next slide really shows the positive that's coming out of our industry right now. And again, Binance has been featured in our slides. So well done, Binance, for creating great news again. So in this case, actually, Binance Charity recently made a donation to the Philippines as part of their Crypto Against COVID campaign to the sum of 3.5 million pesos, which is around 70,000 US dollars, providing basically additional supplies for PPE, including surgical masks, alcohol, face shields, protective shields, and so on. And yet this decentralized organization was able to actually facilitate deliveries to 18 medical and government institutions across 5 different provincial areas here in the Philippines, so covering quite a bit of geography. And their head of the Binance Charity actually mentioned that they, as part of their initiative for Binance Charity, they really aim to showcase that blockchain technology can enable borderless, limitless demonstrations of compassion, right? And I think this is quite a nice case, right? So it really shows what's possible today. I'm sure there will be more in the future. And so just to highlight some ways that this show of goodwill was facilitated by the technology that we're in today. So the funds were actually raised in crypto. So if you go check out their Binance Charity website, you can actually find a Crypto Against COVID page where any of you can actually go in and just make the donations. So you just go in there and facilitate that through crypto. Then obviously the funds are custodied by them, and then they are sent over to the Philippines in crypto, right? And then they work with local partners here to actually convert that into pesos to be able to purchase local goods. Right. It also showed that even despite actually Binance not having a physical headquarters here right now, that their decentralized team and their network were actually strong enough to be able to facilitate, the delivery to so many different geographies within the country, which is, I think it's actually really impressive if you understand how logistics works on the ground here and how much of a nightmare that can be, And finally, as we always love to highlight in blockchain, is you have transparency really in the transaction. So if you can have a look on their website again, they show the transaction IDs for the donations themselves. And I think one step further in the future would actually, even though we see now the photos of people actually receiving the goods, it'd be great to have that, that supply chain integration where you can actually see, really from source up until, final endpoint where it's actually being used for full absolute transparency. But I mean, one step at a time. And so Binance's slogans are really "We heal as one" and using crypto against COVID, and I think that's fantastic in this case. Any thoughts on that, Luke?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I think that Binance is doing the right thing by the markets that they're obviously moving into. So it's good that this stuff happens. I mean, it shows that. Not only does it show that there can be a certain degree of transparency. In regards to charity, we actually had a good chat about this today, Jason, in Malaysia, and it's one of the most important things because we all, to have not only the availability the ability to do those really fast transfers, and then being able to cross international borders really quickly, and then obviously, they're aiming to obviously disperse the funds through local partners, which is good. But the most important thing with anything charity is that transparency factor, because as we all know, the basic anecdote goes that most money that goes to charity ends up staying in the charity and never actually gets distributed. Somewhere between on a worst case charity, 80% stays in the charity or down to 20%, which is still quite significant. And the thing is, a lot of people just donate to these funds and then forget about them. And it means that, but when you actually have a look at a lot of these large charities, they have amazing amounts of internal administration, and internal, like, you know, you got a CEO or a founder getting paid a couple $100,000 a year to administer the charity. Plus, then you're going to have all the staff going out and raising, then the people managing the money and then assessing claims and then deciding where the money's going to go. All these other crazy amounts, and all these people are on salaries. Like the people that you meet on the street who come up to you with a pen and pad and say, hey, you know, do you want to give me your credit card number and you can donate $20 every week? I mean, they not only get paid money, I mean, they also get paid a commission. So the amount of money that when you sometimes donate to these charities, the amount of money that actually ends up going to the cause that you think it's going to is greatly diminished by the time that you give it to them. So if you give them $5, I mean, like the end person might only receive $2 because the administration cost borne by the charity, sometimes legitimate, sometimes not. So I think something like this is good, and it can actually show the benefits. And I think it's sort of, we're starting to hit that earlier. I mean, like where we were a couple of years ago was not early adopter. It was like a phase before that. Like bleeding edge kind of adoption, which is why we saw all the issues that we had. But I think now a lot of these solutions, we can start to see the actual real world applications and where significant positive change can be made using this technology. And if Binance are able to do a reasonable charity fundraise, be completely transparent about where the money's going and make sure that those administrative costs of, you know, taking the money, transferring it, you know, assessing and seeing where it goes, will be absolutely phenomenal. I mean, they're saying that even in Australia now, with all the funds being raised for the bushfire victims, that it's still, where are we now? It's now winter here. It's, you know, we're sort of almost in July, and the bushfires finished in, you know, in February. That's when it all got tied up. We're still seeing a situation where the people are still living in tents here that previously lived in properties that were affected by bushfires. And we're talking, you know, 6 months later, and people are still living in tents because the charity funds, and they raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and the charity funds still haven't reached the desired participants. And some would argue that by the time it does, it's of no use anyway. I mean, you would have been better to stuff some wads of notes into an envelope and just send it to some random person in an address where you knew there was a bushfire. Like that would have actually had a more positive effect. Whether it got to them or not, it would have been more effective. So, I mean, this is a really not only a positive thing from a you know, both a humanitarian and a PR perspective for Binance, but it shows us more the really, really positive change that can be made when things are moved into the blockchain.
Yeah, I've got to completely agree with that. Completely. And this actually just reminds me actually that some people I know actually within the community are working on even greater kind of on-chain transparency tools. I know of a few that are kind of in beta right now. And in the future, what will be made available to kind of the public is actually not just being able to see kind of like transactions and accounts, but being able to see flows of transactions very visibly and easily. So if you can imagine, like in this case, right, imagine seeing like an account which actually had a name. So you have like, let's say the producer of like the Musks, right? And it shows their name clearly, it shows how many funds they received, and then it shows every time like these masks are moved, then you can see it's being tracked at this location. So you know, okay, this logistics company, okay, came to pick it up. Then they dispersed to 5 different regions over here. And then from there, you can actually have people confirm at the end destinations, yes, I received this as well. And soon that will all be transparent on the blockchain, right? And this will be that will be really public, and it will be verifiable, right? So I think that's going to be really exciting, actually.
There's a lot of scope for some positive stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so moving on to my final slide. So I guess this was really big news for this week as well. And again, great PR for the space. And, you know, for the space, we always talk about how immature the industry is still, and how we're still very much in the kind of the building phase. But there is more and more adoption basically happening on a daily basis, right? And PayPal and Venmo basically demonstrated this. So they actually allegedly, now I know that there's some parts of this that aren't 100% qualified yet, but I think the majority of people are stating now that PayPal and Venmo are basically getting into the crypto space and going to be offering access to Bitcoin purchases. And so this is going to be huge for basically mainstream adoption. So for people outside of the space. And recently, actually, Luke, I took a stat from one of your previous webinars here, and I had a look, and basically it's about just over a month ago, we had around 48 million BTC wallet addresses kind of on the Bitcoin blockchain. And if we compare this to basically what PayPal and Venmo have in terms of accounts today, they have about 7 times the number of accounts. I mean, the potential to increase number of active accounts or number of accounts, will be huge. So yeah, they have access to over 300 million customers currently. And obviously, more importantly, actually, and again, I love to think about PR and optics right now, is confidence is a major factor in terms of mainstream adoption, and this is really an indicator, I think, in 2 ways. So firstly, if PayPal and Venmo, so Venmo is actually PayPal's mobile wallet payments processing app. So I mean, you can almost consider them under the same umbrella, right? So if these guys are basically saying, like, we're ready to roll this out to the US and to the rest of the world, it is a sign that regulation must be strong enough for them to feel comfortable to be able to roll out this product and service, right? So that's number one. And then number two, the major one is also that by now PayPal's name is so trusted. Out there, so many people making transactions, receiving payments, using PayPal and Venmo right now. That's just to put that name on it and say, look, okay, now we're offering you additional service. The trust factor is going to be huge for the industry, so that I think that's going to be great. And not just I'm sure they're not doing this out of charity, right? So they're not doing this out of just for goodwill for the industry, but rather actually there's a lot of incentive for fintech wallets and apps to actually add crypto to their revenue streams. And so what's been reported recently in other articles is that actually Cash App, so that's Jack Dorsey's mobile wallet. So Jack Dorsey being the founder of Twitter, right? They actually had a revenue report at the beginning of Q1 2020, where they actually reported $306 million worth of revenue. So you can see that on the screen there. So apparently, yeah, they raked in $306 million worth of Bitcoin purchases in just for their Q1 reportings, which is really very, very significant, right? And these guys are not the only ones to do it. So there are other mainstream fintech platforms out there that are actually offering crypto offerings, like Revolut, which is another kind of like a neobank. So they don't really have any physical locations, but they offer kind of like digital banking solutions. And then obviously the ones that are in the space will very well know Robinhood, who are offering basically trading through a mobile platform. So this is very promising news, again, for what we always strive for, which is kind of like getting crypto and blockchain out there to the mainstream. Any thoughts on that, Luke?
No, man, I'm pretty sure. I think you just covered every angle pretty big. The only thing I'd say is that I think we're not going to see Bitcoin being the rising. I mean, the amount of Bitcoin wallets increasing. I think that the rate of increase will stay as it is, which is a it's the rate of growth is actually slowing. The amount of absolute wallets is increasing, but as a percentage of growth, it's actually slowing down. I think that will continue on wallets that have significantly more utility that I think will actually affect people in the real world. Something like Ethereum, I think, will see a much bigger increase, and there are more active Ethereum wallets than there are Bitcoin wallets. And we'll talk about that. Actually, I'll talk about that now, actually, because I've got to move into. That was your last slide, wasn't it?
That is indeed. Let me switch over.
So I'll put up my screen in a second, but essentially what we've got to look at is, I mean, as Ethereum, like Ethereum, if anyone's been using it lately, will probably notice that transaction costs have gone up significantly. And then obviously, the wait times on blocks to be completed is significant. When maybe 12 months ago, you're paying less than 50 cents worth of gas for a transaction. Now you're paying a couple of bucks. I think the amount of money that's going hammer and tongs into smart contracts at the moment is huge, and that's because of the current rise of DeFi. Now, ironically, most of the volume I'm fairly certain is coming from people farming yield, which means that in the case of comp, which I'll talk about very shortly, is where people basically are trying to game a DeFi system in order to get access to that system's tokens. So I'll use Compen as an example, and Jason actually has been doing a few sessions on this in Malaysia recently, which has been a bit interesting. And he did an experiment where he turned about $1,000 worth of DAI, and then spun it around Compound for a while. So I think he got some DAI, turned it into USDT, and then lent that USDT back to himself and bought more DAI, and then with that DAI bought more USDT and then back again. Now the reason why that happens is the reason why he did that was so that he could get it's called yield farming, where you basically pay he would be paying 5% annually of what he's got in there. So of all the difference between his borrowings and his what he puts up to be borrowed, like as in sort of like staked, and then what he then gets back in what he's then using that money to then, or what he's using that collateral to then borrow, and then he then puts what he's borrowed back up as collateral and back again. It's about a 5% margin, which is what he'd be paying over the course of a year for the joy of doing that. However, so he's losing 5% a year doing that. However, what it allows him to do is earn comp tokens. Now, we'll talk about, I'll get into comp in a second, but the value of the comp tokens as they sit now will give him an income higher. It'll be worth more than the 5% loss that he's made after 12 months, so long as comp maintain their value. And a lot of people are doing this at the moment, which means that a lot of people are executing smart contracts to lock up a certain asset and get a different asset instead, and rolling that around multiple platforms at the same time. So the Ethereum market is getting absolutely slammed. And this is one instance of where you can actually see one of these utility tokens. Remembering that Ethereum's been around since 2015, I think that's when they released the tokens. And so, you've got all these, we've finally seen a project where you've finally seen a project where you actually have people that will need to go to the market to buy the token in order to utilize the system. So specifically the smart contract system that they use. So it's actually like a really, really, really interesting time. So I'm going to share my screen now. I'm just going to share this one. So you're going to get a weird kaleidoscope effect in a second. This one. This is going to happen. There we go. We just need to get away from that. So what I've got here is comp. comps website. And as you can see here, there's, sorry, I will talk about that, go to the main website first. So I'm actually in the process, I'll probably record it tonight and release it later tonight if anyone's interested in WTF is comp. Now, this I'm going to use as a first example to talk about, DeFi in general. But this pretty much is an explanation of how this works. Will then show you how a lot of the other projects that are in the DeFi list are sort of working. So comp is basically a protocol that links borrowers to lenders, and then depending on the supply of a certain, depending on the supply of a certain asset, will adjust the interest rate depending on the demand of that asset. So you'll have supply on one side, demand on the other, and then you'll then have an interest rate that's calculated based on that. So, for example, here, as you can see, right now they have $304 million worth of supply of BAT and $266 million worth of BAT available. Now, once it hits 80% capacity, and it's not quite there yet, this actually jumps to, it's over that actually now. It jumps to like 30%. And then once it gets 20%, so we're slightly over 80% capacity. And then once it gets to 100% capacity, the interest rate will actually jump to 40%. That's actually built into the protocol. Now, the reason for that is so that obviously if there's a great demand for an asset, they want to encourage people to put more in. You basically want to convince people to say, hey, if you can earn 24% per annum on this asset, you should put it into the platform. That will obviously reduce the overall rate, but you need to encourage people to put the thing in. That's why it jumps up to 40% at 100% utility. However, assets that like Ethereum, for example, here you can see 240 million with only 328,000 being borrowed. So the interest rate you earn is negligible, and the interest rate you borrow at is quite negligible as well. Now, the reason for that is because they want people who, in this circumstance, to take advantage of cheap money. Even here, you can see that, the reason why Ethereum is so out and why the numbers are so off is because of the ridiculous amount of Ethereum that's in there. Whereas here, look at something like DAI, 43 million, 0.87% interest rate, 276%, so 276 million is being borrowed. So that's just over 50% utilization, and then the interest rate you can borrow at is 1.44, which is still quite cheap to borrow DAI. And then the algorithm sorts all this out, so you don't have to worry about it. Now, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty on how the process works. Mostly out of time. It's we need to cover a few things, and I don't want to get stuck on this. So I'm not trying to plug the stuff that I'm working on, but if you want to check that out, I'll put a video out soon. And this is obviously that's obviously how that works. Now, there's actually quite a lot of DeFi tokens that work the way that this one does. Now, when we talk about earning comp tokens, what those tokens do is they are distributed to users of the platform. So 50% split by all borrowers and all lenders. So right now it's better to be a borrower if you want to farm yield than being a lender, because you're sharing your 50% of tokens. Like, because basically, every block, 1/2 of a comp token is created. 0.25 goes to the borrowers, 0.25 goes to the lenders. In this case, you're sharing your half a comp with 28,000 other people. If you're a borrower, you're sharing your comp with just under 4,000 other people. So it's quite interesting how that works. So the best thing to do if you want to earn comp is be a borrower. Anyway, so what happens when you earn these tokens? What can you do with them? Well, think of it like I'll just say they're basically a governance token, which means that over time, proposals will be made to change the protocol and how it works. So in this case, you can see, adjusting comp distribution speed to match Ethereum network block time and increasing high-risk assets reserve factor. Okay, set reserve factor to CUSDT to 20%. Set USDT reserve factor from 0 to 10. Now, without really worrying about what all these proposals mean, because we'll be here all night if we have to go through each one, but essentially what happens is if you own more than 1% of all comp tokens, you can put a proposal forward to be voted on. And then obviously, depending on how many comp tokens you have, determines your voting power. One vote is one token. So obviously, the more comp you have, the more votes you have, the more likely you are to you can be to influence the direction of this platform. So this is a platform that's aiming to move to be a complete DAO, so a completely decentralized, or DAO, a completely decentralized autonomous organization, meaning that there are very few humans working in the back end, and all decisions of the organization are going to be made by smart contracts. So at the moment, the functionality of the platform is in these markets, the interest rates, how they adjust over time, the payments of tokens to people, all that's all completely automated by the blockchain and smart contracts. The next thing is the governance. Now, anything that can be adjusted within the platform that doesn't require Oracle. So Oracle basically is looking at real world stuff that isn't digitized, can actually be done and changed. So in this case, you can add tokens that you want to see. You want to see borrow and lent on this platform. You can remove tokens. You can change the amount of risk that you apply to those tokens in regards to these reserve factors. It means that if you put down 1 CUSDT, you can only borrow 80% of what that is worth. So you've got to keep a reserve in there for collateral. Now, the reason why you see all these changes, I won't go into too much detail, but the reason why you can see all these changes, collateral factors changing and reserve factors changing, is to stop people from yield farming. So stop people doing or reduce the ability of the example I used of Jason earlier to be able to just game the system to try to get as many comp tokens as they can. They're trying to clamp down on that because it's not in the spirit of how this is meant to be. I mean, the idea is that you're actually meant to lend tokens and earn a yield, and then that isn't the tokens, that isn't the comp tokens rather, and then you're meant to borrow tokens so you can do whatever you want to do with them. The comp thing is really just meant to be a bonus, but because they're so expensive, people are farming them, and it's obviously not the best use of the system. And it is actually clogging up the ETH network at the moment. So this is one example of decentralized finance where you've got a product, pretty much, like a loans and earnings product. So this very much reduces a lot of, this is a proof that we can reduce a lot of the infrastructure in something like a banking sector. Now, the other interesting thing is this is actually a far more healthy way to lend because we're not creating money out of thin air like you would in a fractional reserve system. So the current banking system we have, it means that if you're a depositor, as in you put money in your bank account, so $100,000, it means that, well, in Australia, the current way that it works, you can borrow, the bank can then on your $100,000 lend upwards of $1 million. So it's a fairly, and that means that money's literally being created out of thin air. So if the assets, or if more than 10% of the loans that they send out go bad, it basically means the bank can go bankrupt, which is an issue. So what we'll have a look at, and this is obviously where the token has sort of gone parabolic over the past little while. So comp as a token has actually gone absolutely ballistic. Now, the reason for this is because the available supply of the tokens is incredibly low. Only 2,880 are released every day, and it's only been out for, well, it'll be 2 weeks on Monday. So, at the moment, it actually should tell you here, if we go to markets, no, it won't. It'll be down here in comp. Totally distributed 37,000 tokens. So in the market now, of an available 4 million, 37,000 are available. So you've got an incredibly low buy-sell liquidity. So obviously there's demand is higher than supply, and that pushes the price up. But because this token is so limited, it's very hard to get hold on, because a lot of people that are earning it are just going to keep it in their wallet. It's not going to see the markets. So so you're not seeing a lot of tokens that are getting sold. So it means that even if, let's say, half of those tokens are being held and half are being put on the market, you're still only talking under 20,000 tokens that are available, which is why so many people are paying high money to get a hold of them. And there's a number of reasons, but I think mostly it's driven by hype. And then once more people become aware of the project, it's like, oh my God, I better get into that. And we've all seen that, how that works when, if you're involved in the market in 17 and 18. So that's basically how it works. And then there's there's been a lot of positive announcements, like it's listing on Coinbase, listing on Binance. It's got a few fairly big exchange listings. which obviously pushes up the price because the value of the underlying token will increase with the amount of exchanges it's available to be traded in. Now, if you're lucky enough, yeah, sorry.
So for your regular kind of comp retail purchaser, right? What's the benefit of actually being able to access, the governance of the protocol itself?
Well, it's still an experiment. At the moment, it's completely irrelevant. Mostly because if we go back to the amount of people that we go back to the votes, for example. This guy here, A16Z, Polychain Capital, Dharma, Gauntlet, and Paradigm, all VCs that probably invested in their either early stage seed or their seed A round, have a significant amount of tokens. So vote weight 3.45%. They voted on 3, but you can pretty much guarantee that anything these guys vote on is going to get passed. And the VCs will generally be passing things that will be in their best interest. But for an individual, one individual who buys every comp token that hits the markets to outweigh these guys, look, if we're at the amount we are now at 2 weeks, it's going to take 20 weeks. So, just under half a year, 6 months. And that means you buy every available token. And then you'll be where these guys are. So even after a year, you'd have to buy 50% of the public token supply to be able to take one of these VCs out in regards to voting power. So at the moment, I'd probably say it's irrelevant. Over time, people will be able to make a bit more of an impact. But at the moment, it's still the founders and the VCs that really dominate that voting pattern. The benefit is going to be depending on what they vote to do with the platform token itself. So just remember, it's moving towards being a DAO, so which means that essentially token holders can benefit from positive and negative and changes in the protocol. So if they decide, and this is an option, I'm not sure how they're going to do it, but I have seen it written that you can potentially say a percentage of profits is now going to be distributed to token holders. Now, from a technology standpoint, that's not overly difficult to do. From a legal standpoint, that then makes this a security token, which then gets a little bit more complicated. So, I mean, that is something that people might vote on. And then it means the protocol would then have to allocate profits earned by the business to token holders. So that is always a good thing. I don't know how legally they'd be able to pull it off, seeing as it becomes a security, but it's that could be a thing. So yeah, I mean that's one of the benefits you can have maybe from this token, or they might say we're going to burn 50% of tokens, something like that. I don't know.
But it sounds like for the average kind of retail kind of investor right now,
you're buying on speculation.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so the governance kind of aspect is not so applicable to us because I mean, you need to come in with significant.
But the thing is that people need to be aware of that if they're looking at investing. You're buying on pure speculation. That the amount of demand is going to outstrip the upcoming available supply. So if there's 2,800 tokens being minted every day to the users, and 50% of those are going to make their way to the market, so 1,440. You need to make the assumption that there are enough people out there willing to eat up that supply side to keep pushing the price up, if you believe that's the case. And probably they'll get some more press and and they got some really, really good press last week when, this comp token and everyone was sort of, trying to find out how this thing worked. If you think the demand will outstrip that supply, there could be money to be made there. So, so that's comp. Now, if we have a look at the other thing as well, and the other reason why it's sort of gone up off the back of these listings is because people previously used something like this. This is called Uniswap. So this is a decentralized exchange, and this is one of the ones with a bit more of an interesting, a bit more of an easier to use. User interface.
UI.
Yeah. So if you look at something like comp, the way that it works essentially is that it doesn't work like a standard order book. It works basically like a swap, where you'll get your comp tokens, and then you'll then convert them to ETH or vice versa, and then you'll buy and sell or whatever. And so basically not many people use this platform because it's not like a standard exchange. So the initial trading all happened on something like this. So it meant that there was a belief that there would have been a large supply of buyers on normal exchanges who weren't using something like this. And this is another reason why a lot of ETH was being eaten up, because Uniswap uses smart contracts to facilitate transfers. So obviously you need to pay more ETH than you say would in trading fees with a trading platform like CoinSpot or Binance. So if we have a look at the different types of DeFi projects out here, this is a fairly comprehensive list by no question. There's a few that aren't on here. But you can see that there's a significant amount in lending. There's a number involved in trading. Now, most of these trading solutions are generally about order book combining, order book pooling, which personally for me, I think is a futile technology. A lot of them are decentralized exchanges. So things that are looking at, not needing a centralized order book, that there's no need for a centralized custodial service to facilitate transactions between people. That essentially there could be an open market where I could make a trade hypothetically, but anonymously with Peter, and the market, like a normal market of supply and demand, would determine the price, but the funds wouldn't go from me to Binance, from Binance to Peter. The funding would just go straight from me to Peter. And that would all be handled via smart contracts. And then people obviously would still be putting in bids and asks and whatever. It would be still an order book, but the actual transfer of assets would just literally go from one person to another without a need for an exchange wallet in the middle or something like that. So that's how Uniswap works, for example, fully decentralized on-chain protocol for token exchanges on Ethereum that uses liquidity pools instead of order books. So what these guys do is they actually allow people to I guess it's not donate, to loan liquidity to the exchange in order to facilitate transactions quickly. And then you earn a percentage of trading fees by doing that. So it can actually be a reasonable. Payments. So Flexar is a project I go on about a fair bit. And there's a few payment solutions out there. So this is not only allowing people to use crypto as as an instant way to spend on your credit card or something like that. This is using blockchain technology to basically, in the same way that a lot of these lending applications are trying to take out a lot of the fat inside a banking institution, getting rid of a lot of that administrative burden. These guys are doing the same thing with in more of a credit card kind of payments version. They're removing a lot of that fat that something automated can actually handle, trustless and automated. Then you've got your wallets, yet again, just storage, nothing overly exciting there. Some of them are going to be custodial, non-custodial. Interfaces, so this is one that people are going on about. I've seen a lot of stuff on this. I have no idea how it's meant to work, but it's basically Bamboo Relay. It looks like basically an interface that will link your wallet, your exchange, and your DeFi platform all together. Infrastructure, so obviously OX is I think it's a governance token for a protocol about liquidity providers. Then you've got things like, I did see one that was interesting here. Don't know a fair amount about. No, can't remember. Wrap BTC. So it means that you can transfer Bitcoin using the Ethereum network. So this is allowing people to say use Bitcoin within smart contracts. And there's a number of different infrastructure projects, but there was one, Lightning Network, allowing faster payments through Bitcoin. But there's a number of projects here. I'm not going to go through all of them because they go on for a while. But there's actually quite a lot of tech being built out in the space, and this is where we're actually in that point where we're seeing, where we're actually starting to see a lot of real world applications of blockchain starting to happen. So it's actually a very, very exciting time to be in the space. There will be a hype cycle on this, I have no doubt. There will be people who make and lose a lot of money, and you just need to make sure you're the ladder, not the. You need to make sure you're the former, not the ladder. You want to be the one making all the money, and the way to probably do that is be probably over the next few months be incredibly cynical, which has never been a problem for me, unfortunately. Be incredibly cynical and really look out for those. Any kind of dodgy project generally will try to hook you in with unrealistic gains. So the kind of thing where they're saying, if you give us your Bitcoin, you give us your Ethereum, you give us whatever, we're going to give you an interest rate of, 25% a day or 5% a day, some ridiculous rate. I mean, although the rates on Compound are fairly obscene, in some cases, there is rhyme behind the reason, and it's not insane. Like 25% per annum is pretty high, but it's not ridiculous. It's not 25% a week or 25% a month. 25% per annum is on the high end, but not real. It's pretty not insane. But as you can see here, most of the other returns are actually quite reasonable.
Yeah, I've seen some people in the space commenting that DeFi could be the next scam space in the industry as well, where you're going to just see a ton of projects coming up,
no doubt,
and it's going to be very hard. It's going to be hard to identify basically which ones are the legitimate projects and which ones are not.
Well, all projects that are using smart contracts generally have them written up on GitHub. So you just have to it would probably not take much research, 10, 15 minutes. And then anyone that is looking into this stuff will generally write stuff about projects that have got weird smart contracts.
The funny thing is, like, for smart contracts, right, the majority of people don't know how to obviously read them. I mean, I for one don't know how to.
Oh no, I'm not suggesting people need to become programming experts to try to read how a smart contract works, but you just need to spend more than 5 minutes Googling, and you should find your answer about how legitimate they are. But I think the first step is always the returns. If the returns are ridiculous, then and if anyone talks about the value of the token, what they believe the value of their token will be, the amount of money you can make, it's probably a scam. Every legitimate project that I've ever seen has never talked about price appreciation of their token. They've talked about more people are going to use it, more people are going to do this, more people are going to do that, but they're never going to say our token's going to list at 50 cents and we expect it's going to be $1 in 2 years' time or a year's time or whatever. I've never seen legitimate projects do that. Only really dodgy ones. So that is your first. If the offer looks too good to be true in crypto, you're better to miss it. You're better to just walk away if it's too good to be true. Because 99.9% of the time it is. There's very few insanely good offers. And obviously, if you're going to invest in something, don't put in all your money. You're better to spread your risk in crypto than try to go ham on one project.
Yeah, true. What are your thoughts on yield farming? I mean, my particular take on that is, I mean, you have so many different separate points of failure that it kind of feels a little bit too risky. I mean, like, and also the rewards out of yield farming are not necessarily huge. That I don't know if I would actually. I mean, I don't know a huge amount about it, but I mean, you basically have an option of just holding on and just waiting for accumulated interest over time that your assets will just go up, rather than actually spread them out into like 3 or 4 different projects and see if you can accumulate on multiple different platforms.
Personally, I think that if you're going to be sitting on the things and you're going to be sitting on these assets and doing nothing with them, is going to hodl for a year. I mean, why not? I don't necessarily think that there is a lot of benefit, and no offense, Jason, I don't think there's a lot of benefit doing what Jason's doing outside of a learning exercise, and he learned a lot doing that, so I'm not going to discount it. Because basically you're risking your capital to gain access to a token that may not hold its value over time. So you might be saying, okay, if comp's worth 200, I need X many comp tokens to then make my 5% back. And that could be 3 or 4 months after you factor in transaction costs and the value of Ether and all that kind of stuff. And then it's like, okay, I broke even after a year. And then it's like, well, what's the point? Because you should be considering risk versus reward. How much am I risking? And then how much can I potentially gain? And if the gain is 10% per annum, but I've got a risk, not having ready. I mean, like, you can pull your money out whenever you want to on Compound, for example. but you're in this feedback loop to try to earn tokens. So your risk is about 5 to 10% to then gain maybe 5%. So for me, and obviously the interest rates are variable. So if you get caught on the bad side of an interest rate increase, it can actually not help you too much.
I mean, I would add the risk of the infrastructure risk as well. So I mean, like if you remember in Black Thursday, it was really hard basically to even liquidate any positions in like Maker. So like any CDPs that you'd created there, there wasn't enough liquidity basically to liquidate your positions. And then again, like if you remember with BZX with the hack, they lost so much liquidity that you couldn't basically liquidate positions, a couple weeks later.
And it's not necessarily a fault of the. It's not necessarily the fault of like a compound or an Aave, or it's not a fault of the service provider. Yeah, it's a fault of the backbone network in that, and this is something that I guess maybe the technology has surpassed the network where it is now, and until maybe Ethereum gets Casper up and running, I think yeah, it's going to continue to be a problem. Now, once we get once there's proof of stake and all this other kind of stuff, I think a lot of those issues will be deleted. We just have to wait and see what happens, really.
Yeah.
But for me, it's not my thing. I think it's a good exercise. But personally, it's like, well, if you're going to hold no matter what, then why not? But you're right. If there is an issue with the Ethereum network and we get a CryptoKitties Mac 2 happen, and then you'd be looking at 18-hour transaction times to execute. And if the individual smart contract is getting smashed, then a lot of transactions will get bumped. So there's that part as well. You don't want to be putting all your eggs in that basket. But as an exercise, it's kind of interesting. As an experiment, it's very interesting. But I guess, like everything, you've got to experiment, get it out there, see what happens, so that then the next wave or the next round of development that these guys do will make a far superior product.
Yeah. On that note, we're coming up to the hour. And if people want to learn more about DeFi, actually, our partners at Bitcoin Malaysia are doing quite a lot on the education side. So they're hosting quite a few webinars on this. So check out bitcoinmalaysia.com. Check them out on Facebook, Bitcoin Malaysia. And for us, come find us. So if you're not subscribed already, find BlockchainSpace on YouTube, find BlockchainSpace on Facebook. Give us a like and make sure you subscribe to our content. And then for Luke, your channels?
Oh, my channel, just our portfolio stuff is on Fortifex. But if you want to see my channel, it's Blocksiders. So BlockSiders. I guess, Peter, if you can probably just put the links in the comments or something. And then we can do it that way. But I'm going to be doing a video. I'll probably record it tonight, and then editing will take a bit of time. So hopefully tonight or tomorrow, I'm going to put out a pretty much a summarized version of what I just talked about on comp, but diving mostly into comp. And then I've got an interview with one of the major tech guys in Malaysia, talking about the DeFi space in general and the bigger picture of DeFi, which is coming up, and I'll put that out early next week. So I've got two major bits coming up in the next few days that I think will be really interesting. Looking forward to get those out. So yeah, if that's something you're interested in, come find my channel, Blocksiders, and the usual stuff, like, subscribe, press the bell, and then you'll be notified when it comes up.
Yep, perfect. All right. See you next week, guys.